The night I found the dog was colder than any I had felt that autumn in Charleston. The wind coming from the cemetery seemed to bite at my skin like it carried a sickness. I had been walking home from the store, my hands numb around the plastic bags, when I saw it lying there, just beyond the old iron gates of St. Luke's Cemetery. It was small, its fur patchy, white in some places, and matted brown in others. Its ribs showed as if it had been starving for weeks. The way it breathed, shallow and raspy, stirred a strange ache of pity in me. The street around the cemetery was empty. The lamps above flickered weakly, their light barely stretching past the first few headstones. I hesitated, but stepped closer. My shoes crunched over the gravel. The dog lifted its head slowly, its eyes glinting faintly in the dim light. Something about its stare made me freeze. The pupils looked cloudy, almost pale, like frost covering glass. Still, I bent down. It looked so weak, so close to death, that I could not imagine it being dangerous. I reached my hand toward it. It did not growl or shy away. It simply looked at me, and a strange shiver went through my chest. I told myself it was the wind. It tried to stand, but its legs trembled. Without thinking, I set my bags down and picked it up. Its body felt lighter than it should, almost hollow. I thought of bones and skin. The moment I turned away from the cemetery, I heard something behind me. The sound was like the slow creak of the iron gates shifting. I glanced back. The gates stood still, but the shadows beyond them looked darker than before, almost solid. I hurried home. Our house was an old two-story place my grandmother had inherited from her parents. It stood at the edge of a narrow street, the paint peeling and the wood swollen from years of southern humidity. My grandmother, Helen, always said the house had its own voice at night. The pipes groaned, the floors popped, and sometimes the wind slid through the cracks with a sound like whispering. When I stepped inside with the dog in my arms, the air felt heavier. My grandmother was in her chair in the living room, knitting. My Uncle Robert sat at the table sorting through some old tools, and my Aunt Margaret was in the kitchen washing dishes. Grandmother's knitting needles paused when she saw me. Her eyes dropped to the dog. Her face changed in a way I could not read. "Where did you find that?" she asked slowly. "In front of St. Luke's Cemetery," I said. It looked like it had not eaten for days. Robert turned his head, his brow furrowed. "You brought something from there into the house." "It is just a dog," I said. But Margaret stepped into the doorway, drying her hands on a towel. Her eyes stayed fixed on the dog. "That cemetery has been closed for years," she said. "Nobody goes there." I could feel their unease pressing on me, but I did not want to abandon the creature. I set it down on an old blanket near the fireplace. It curled into itself without a sound. That night, as the others went to bed, I lay awake in my room upstairs. The house was quiet, except for the faint sound of the dogs breathing below. But after a while, I realized it was not the only sound. There was something else, a faint clicking noise. It was slow, irregular, like nails tapping across the wooden floor. I told myself it was just the dog moving, but the sound came from the hallway outside my room. I sat up, my heart pounded. The hallway was dark, the only light spilling in from my window. I strained my ears. The tapping stopped. I waited 4 minutes, but nothing happened. Eventually I lay back down, though my skin prickled as if someone stood just beyond the door. When morning came, the dog was still on the blanket, but something was different. Its fur looked thicker in some places, darker in color. Its eyes seemed clearer, but not in a way that comforted me. The pupils were now deep black, sharp like drops of ink. Grandmother did not speak to me at breakfast. Robert kept glancing toward the living room. Margaret stayed quiet. That afternoon, I noticed the dog had not touched the bowl of food I set out. The meat was untouched, but the water was gone. I refilled it. That night, the clicking sound returned, but it was louder. This time I heard it move across the stairs, one slow step at a time. I stepped out of bed. My bare feet touched the cold floor. I opened my door slightly. The hallway was empty. I looked down the staircase. Something moved in the dark below. At first it was just the faint outline of the dog sitting at the bottom of the stairs, but its shape seemed strange. The head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and its body seemed longer than it should be. I closed the door and locked it. The next morning, Robert told me he had heard scratching at his bedroom door in the night. Long, steady scratches, as if something was trying to get in. Margaret looked pale. She said she had dreamt of a dog standing at the foot of her bed. It was dripping wet, its fur hanging in clumps, and its eyes were hollow. Grandmother said nothing. That evening, I went to check on the dog again. It was lying in the same spot, but its body looked different once more. Its legs were thinner, almost too long for its frame, and its mouth seemed to curl slightly even when closed. The water bowl was empty again. I decided to follow it that night. I left my door unlocked, pretending to sleep. At around midnight, I heard the clicking. It moved past my door. I waited, then stepped out quietly. The dog was halfway down the stairs. Its head turned toward me slowly. Its eyes were not black anymore. They were white, pure white, and they glowed faintly in the dark. It did not move. Neither did I. Then it turned back toward the front door and continued downward. I followed at a distance. The dog reached the bottom of the stairs, then walked into the hallway leading to the back door. It stopped at the door. Its body shifted slightly, and I heard a sound like bone creaking. The door opened. The dog stepped outside into the yard. I followed it into the cold night air. It walked toward the back fence, the one that bordered the overgrown lot behind our house. But when it reached the fence, it did not stop. It passed through it. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The dog stood on the other side, looking back at me. Its mouth opened slightly. I saw teeth far too many for its small head. Then it was gone. I ran back inside. The next morning, the dog was on the blanket again, as if nothing had happened. But there was dirt on its paws, and something dark, almost black, stained its fur around the mouth. Margaret screamed when she opened the back door. On the porch lay a dead squirrel. Its body was twisted, its eyes gone. Grandmother told us to get rid of the dog, but by then, I think it was too late. The day after the dead squirrel appeared, the air in the house felt different, heavier, as if the walls themselves were absorbing something from the dog. Robert refused to go into the living room. Margaret barely spoke at all, her eyes red from lack of sleep. Grandmother sat in her chair staring out the window, her knitting untouched in her lap. The dog stayed curled on the blanket, its breathing slow, but every now and then I would catch it looking at me. Its head would be turned slightly, the angle unnatural, its eyes bright in the dim light. That night the scratching began again, louder this time. It came from the walls, moving from one end of the house to the other. Robert stormed out of his room, a hammer in his hand. He slammed his fist against the wall. "Come out," he shouted. The scratching stopped, but something else started. A low sound, almost like breathing, deep inside the walls. Robert's face went pale. Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs. She was shaking. She said she had seen the dog in the hallway outside her room, but it had been standing on its hind legs, its body swaying slightly, its head tilted all the way back. I went to the living room. The blanket was empty. The back door was wide open. I stepped outside into the dark. The yard was still, but the air felt colder than before. At the far end of the yard near the fence, something moved, a shadow. The dog stepped forward into the weak light of the porch. Its body looked wrong. The legs were too thin, the joints bending slightly the wrong way. Its fur seemed darker, and its back arched unnaturally. I stepped back. The dog tilted its head. A sound came from its throat. Not a growl, not a bark. It was a low, hollow sound. like wind moving through a tunnel. Then it walked toward the cemetery. I did not follow this time. When I went back inside, the smell hit me first. It was faint, like something damp and rotting. Margaret covered her mouth. Robert checked the doors. All were locked, but in the hallway near the stairs, wet footprints marked the floor. Small at first, then longer, as if something had stretched while walking. That night, I dreamed of the cemetery. I saw rows of broken headstones, the earth shifting as if something beneath was moving. The dog stood among them, its eyes bright white, its mouth opening slowly until it split too far. I woke to the sound of my grandmother screaming. I ran to her room. She was sitting up in bed, her hands shaking, pointing toward the corner. I looked. The dog was there. It was standing still, its legs impossibly thin now, its spine protruding through the fur. Its head turned toward me slowly. I reached for the light. The corner was empty. Grandmother would not sleep again that night. The next day she told me. The dog was not a dog at all. She said she had seen its true face for a moment, and it was nothing that belonged in this world. Robert wanted to take it back to the cemetery, but when he went to pick it up, it was gone. We searched the house, but there was no sign of it. Until night fell, the clicking returned, louder than before. From the attic this time, Robert climbed the ladder. I stayed at the bottom, listening. His footsteps echoed above. Then there was silence. Margaret called his name. No answer. Something moved in the shadows above. The ladder shook. Robert climbed down, his face pale. There was nothing up there, he said. But behind him, in the darkness of the attic, two faint white eyes glowed. After that night, with the attic, no one in the house spoke much. But the silence was worse than the fear. The air felt heavy. Every room smelled faintly of damp earth. The walls seemed darker, as if the wood itself had soaked in something rotten. The dog was no longer on the blanket. It appeared in different places now. Sometimes in the hallway, sometimes at the bottom of the stairs, sometimes in the kitchen. Its head just visible beyond the doorway. Each time its body looked different. One night I saw it by the front door. Its legs were longer than before, its body hunched forward, as if pulled by invisible strings. Its fur hung in strips, wet, as if it had crawled from water. Robert stopped sleeping in his room. He moved a chair into the hallway, so he could watch the stairs at night. But the clicking kept coming, sometimes above him, sometimes below. Margaret began locking her door. She said she had woken to the sound of breathing at her ear. When she turned, the dog was lying on the floor beside her bed, its body stretched, almost the full length of the room. Grandmother barely spoke. She sat in her chair, staring at the wall. One morning I found deep scratches on the arm of the chair, as if something with long claws had gripped it during the night. Then came the night the lights went out. The storm outside was heavy, rain pounding the roof like fists. The wind howled through the cracks in the old house. The power cut suddenly. The house was swallowed in darkness. We gathered in the living room. Robert lit a lantern. The faint light shook in his hand. The clicking began. From the upstairs hallway, Margaret gripped my arm. Her nails dug into my skin. The sound grew louder, slowly descending the stairs. I looked toward the staircase. The dog stepped into the lantern light, but it was no longer the size of a dog. Its body stretched unnaturally tall, its limbs thin as sticks, its spine arched, each bone visible beneath the wet fur. Its face was longer, the mouth stretched too far, teeth glistening. Its eyes glowed white, brighter than before. It took another step. The sound of its claws against the wood was sharp, echoing through the house. Robert raised the hammer in his hand, his knuckles white. The dog's mouth opened. A sound poured out. Not a growl, not a howl. It was a long, low moan, like voices calling from deep underground. The lantern flickered in that moment. The dog moved. It was fast, too fast. 1 second it was on the stairs. The next it was in the center of the room. The smell of earth and rot filled my lungs. Robert swung the hammer. It passed through the air. The dog was gone. The lantern went out. In the darkness, I heard Margaret scream. Something heavy moved across the floor, a wet sound like something dragging. I reached for the lantern, my hands shaking. When I lit it again, Margaret was on the floor, her eyes wide. She pointed toward the hallway dot. At the far end, the dog stood. Its shape shifted as I watched, the legs bending in ways that made my stomach twist. Its head turned slowly, too far, until it faced us without moving its body. Then it stepped backward into the dark dot. We stayed in the living room until morning. None of us slept. When the light returned, the dog was gone, but muddy footprints led from the hallway to the back door, and on the porch, lying in the wet, was something small, a bone, not from an animal. The morning after we found the bone, the house felt wrong in a way I cannot explain. The air was colder, not from the weather, but as if something had drained the warmth from the walls themselves. The floorboards creaked under my steps, like something beneath them shifted with each movement. Robert wanted to burn the bone. He took it to the backyard, his hands trembling. Margaret and I stood by the back steps, watching. He set it in an old metal bucket and poured lighter fluid over it. The flame caught quickly. Smoke rose into the damp air. The smell was not like burning wood or hair. It was sweet at first, then bitter, like something rotting deep in the earth. Grandmother was at the window, staring. Her eyes were wide, but she said nothing. That night, the sound returned. But it was no longer just the clicking. It was scratching again. But now it came from outside the windows. All of them. We stayed in the living room with the lantern lit. Rain tapped against the glass. But every few minutes, the scratching would move to a different window. Then we heard it from the roof. Slow, dragging steps. Robert gripped the hammer, his face pale. Margaret whispered that she saw a shadow move across the glass. I looked. A shape passed by the window. Tall, thin, its head bent low. The lantern flickered. A deep sound came from outside. The same hollow voice I had heard before, but this time it was louder. Then came the smell. Damp earth, rot. Grandmother stood suddenly. Her voice was shaking. She said we had to leave the house. Robert argued, but she would not listen. She said it was not safe inside anymore. We waited until morning. The sky was gray as we stepped outside. The air felt heavy. We walked toward the street, but as we reached the edge of the yard, I saw something in the mud. Tracks, not paw prints. Long, thin impressions, almost like human feet, but stretched and bent. They led from the back of the yard toward the cemetery. Margaret stopped walking. She said she heard something, a low sound. From the direction of the cemetery, we turned at the far end of the street. Beyond the iron gates, the dog stood. It was taller now, its back arched like a question mark, its mouth hanging open as if it had been caught mid-breath. Its eyes glowed, even in daylight. It took a step forward. Robert pulled us toward the car, but when he tried to start it, the engine would not turn. Margaret screamed. She was staring at the rear window. I looked. The dog was closer. It had not walked. It was just closer. Grandmother told us to get back in the house. We ran inside. The door slammed shut. For the rest of the day, the scratching never stopped. It moved from wall to wall, floor to ceiling. Sometimes there were thuds, as if something heavy was throwing itself against the house. By nightfall, the sound was inside again. And this time, it was not just the dog. I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, heavy. Margaret locked herself in her room. Robert stayed by the stairs. Grandmother prayed in her chair, her voice trembling. I sat on the floor, listening. The footsteps moved toward my room, then toward Margaret's. Then they stopped. Silence, until I heard breathing at my ear. I turned. Nothing was there. But in the hallway, just beyond the lantern's light, something moved. A shape too tall for the ceiling, its head bent low, its limbs thin and twisted. The lantern flickered, and the scratching began again. The night after the scratching came from inside. Robert decided we could not just wait. He said we had to end it. Margaret begged him not to go near the cemetery, but Robert would not listen. He said he had lived in this house his whole life and had never seen anything like this until I brought the dog in. Grandmother stayed silent. Her eyes looked hollow. Before sunrise, Robert took the hammer, a lantern, and a length of rope. I tried to follow, but he told me to stay. He walked down the street toward the iron gates. The air was cold. I watched from the window. The cemetery stood still. The iron gates, unmoving. Robert passed through them. His lantern swung in the fog. Then the light stopped moving. A moment later, the sound came. It was faint at first, like claws on stone. Then it grew louder. Margaret gripped my arm. Her breath shook in the fog near the gates. Something shifted. The lantern fell. The light went out. I ran outside before Margaret could stop me. The fog wrapped around me like cold fingers. I reached the gates. Inside, the cemetery was silent. I called Robert's name. No answer. The ground felt soft under my feet, like the earth had been turned recently. Then I saw it. The dog stood between two broken headstones. Its body was worse than before. The legs were impossibly thin, the fur patchy and wet. Its chest was stretched, ribs visible and sharp. Its head hung low, but its eyes looked up at me, white and bright in the fog. Its mouth opened. Something dropped. From it a piece of rope. I stepped back. The dog moved forward. It did not walk. Its body stretched toward me as if pulled by something unseen. I turned and ran. When I reached the house, Margaret was crying. Robert had not come back. Grandmother sat in her chair, staring at the door. The rest of the day the house was silent, except for the faint sound of breathing in the walls. That night, the scratching returned, but now it came from Robert's room. Margaret refused to go upstairs. I went alone. The door to his room was open. Inside, the air was cold. The window was wide open. The curtains moved in the wind. On the floor near the bed were muddy footprints, long thin impressions leading toward the window, and on the bed lay Robert's hammer. It was wet. The smell of earth filled the room. As I stepped back into the hallway, the dog stood at the far end, its body stretched high enough that its head nearly touched the ceiling. Its mouth hung open. Inside was darkness, and something moved in that darkness. After Robert vanished, the house felt emptier, but it was not quiet. The sounds continued. The scratching, the clicking, the slow heavy steps that seemed to come from nowhere. Margaret stopped sleeping. She began pacing the halls at night, muttering to herself. She said the dog was watching her even when it was not there. I found her one morning standing at the kitchen window. She was staring into the yard. Her eyes were wide, unblinking. I asked her what she saw. She said the dog was standing by the fence. I looked. The yard was empty, but Margaret would not move. She said it was smiling at her. Later that day, she refused to eat. She sat in the living room, her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes darting to the corners of the room. At night, she began hearing it speak. I woke to her voice, low and trembling, answering questions I could not hear. When I asked her who she was talking to, she said the dog was at the foot of her bed. I looked. Nothing was there, but the smell of earth was strong. By the third night, Margaret's voice had changed. It was quieter, almost a whisper. She spoke less to us and more to whatever she thought was in the room. Grandmother prayed louder, but her voice shook. Then came the night Margaret disappeared. I woke to the sound of footsteps running through the hall. I stepped out of my room. Margaret was at the top of the stairs. Her eyes were wide, her hair hanging loose, her face pale. She looked at me and smiled. She said she had to go. Before I could stop her, she turned and ran down the stairs. The front door opened on its own, cold. Air poured in. Margaret stepped outside into the dark. I ran after her. She was walking toward the cemetery. The dog stood at the gates. Its body was worse than before. Its legs bent backward, its spine jutting out like sharp stones. Its head hung low, its mouth open wider than any animal's mouth should be. Margaret walked toward it, as if in a trance. I called her name. She did not turn. The fog thickened. I ran forward, but by the time I reached the gates, Margaret was gone. The dog stood alone. Its eyes glowed in the fog. It stepped back into the dark, and the gates creaked shut. When I returned to the house, Grandmother was still in her chair. She did not ask where Margaret was. She just stared at the wall, her lips moving in a silent prayer. After Margaret was gone, the house felt hollow. Grandmother stayed in her chair, the same way she had since Robert vanished. But that night her eyes were different. They were fixed on me as if she had been waiting. She told me to sit. Her voice was low and steady. She said St. Luke's Cemetery had always been wrong. She said there were graves there older than the town itself. Graves without names, without markers. She told me her own mother had warned her never to step through the gates after sunset. I asked her why. She said there were things in the ground that should never have been buried. Her voice trembled then. She told me the dog was not a dog. It was a thing that could take the shape of what you pitied most. And once it crossed your threshold, it would not leave until it had taken what it came for. She looked at me. Her hands were shaking. She said it had come for our bloodline. The room felt colder. The scratching began again, this time from the hallway. Grandmother's eyes moved to the doorway. The sound grew louder, closer. Then the clicking began, slow, steady, each step echoing through the house. Grandmother whispered something I could not hear. Her hands gripped the arms of the chair. The clicking stopped. The dog was standing in the doorway. Its body was almost unrecognizable. The legs were long and thin, the joints bent backward. Its torso was stretched, ribs sharp and visible. Its neck was longer now, the head hanging low, but the eyes fixed on us. Its mouth opened. The sound that came out was like voices layered on top of one another. Some deep, some whispering, all speaking words I could not understand. Grandmother stood slowly. She told me to run. I froze. The dog stepped into the room. The smell of earth and rot filled my lungs. Grandmother shouted at me again, louder this time. The dog moved faster than I could see. One moment it was across the room, the next it was in front of her. Its mouth opened wide. The lantern flickered. When the light steadied, the chair was empty. Grandmother was gone. The dog stood in the center of the room, its mouth hung open. Inside was only darkness. Then it stepped backward into the hallway and was gone. I was alone. The house was silent after Grandmother was gone, but the silence did not bring peace. It felt alive. The walls seemed to breathe. The floor creaked under steps that were not mine. The air smelled of damp earth, stronger than before, as if the cemetery had seeped into the wood. I locked the doors. I closed the windows. I lit every lantern I could find, but the darkness inside the house felt thicker, heavier. The scratching began as soon as night fell. It started at the back door, then it moved to the windows, then to the roof. The clicking followed. Slow, deliberate steps, circling the house. I stayed in the living room, the lantern light trembling. The sound stopped. The house fell silent. Then I heard breathing behind me. I turned. Nothing was there. I stepped back toward the center of the room. The breathing came again, this time from the hallway. I looked. The hallway was dark, the lantern light not reaching the end. Something moved in the shadows. A shape stepped forward. The dog, its body was worse than ever. The legs were thin as sticks, bending the wrong way. Its spine was arched high, each bone pressing against the skin. The head hung at an unnatural angle. The mouth stretched impossibly wide. Its eyes glowed white in the dark. It stepped closer. I stepped back. The lantern flickered. The dog's body shifted as it moved, its limbs lengthening, the joints bending, until it almost crawled along the floor. The smell of earth filled my chest. I ran up the stairs. The clicking followed. It was slow at first, then faster. I reached my room and slammed the door. The scratching began immediately. Long, deep scratches on the wood. I backed away. The scratching stopped. Then came the sound of nails tapping on the floor. Moving away. The house fell silent again. I waited. Minutes passed. Then the clicking started. Above me, in the attic, something moved across the floorboards. A low sound came from above, like a voice whispering my name. The lantern went out. The room was dark. The scratching returned. But now it came from inside the walls. I pressed my back against the far wall, my heart pounding. The scratching grew louder, closer, until it was right behind me. I ran out of the room and down the stairs. In the living room, the dog stood by the front door. It was taller now, its head bent low to fit under the ceiling. Its mouth was open, the darkness inside deeper than before. I knew then that I could not stay in the house. If I wanted to survive, I would have to go to the cemetery. The dog stepped aside, its eyes fixed on me. It was waiting. The night was heavy with fog as I stepped outside. The street was empty. The iron gates of St. Luke's Cemetery waited at the end, black against the pale mist. Each step toward them felt heavier, as if the air itself was pressing against me. The closer I came, the colder it grew. The smell of damp earth was stronger. Here, almost choking, the gates loomed tall, their black paint peeling, rust clinging to the bars. They were open. I stepped inside. The ground felt soft beneath my feet, like it had been disturbed recently. The cemetery was silent. No wind, no insects, only the sound of my own breathing. Rows of headstones stood in the fog, some broken, some leaning. Names carved into stone were worn smooth by time. The deeper I went, the colder it became. Shadows moved in the mist. At first I thought it was the fog shifting. But then I saw shapes, figures standing between the headstones. They did not move. I stepped closer. They were statues, weathered, cracked, their faces worn away. But as I looked at them, I felt their heads turning, ever so slightly, to watch me pass. The clicking began then, faint at first, from far away, then louder. It came from deeper inside the cemetery. I followed. The sound. The fog thickened until I could barely see a few feet ahead. The clicking stopped. I stood still, listening. The silence was worse than the sound. Then I heard breathing low, heavy, close. I turned. The dog was there. Its body was taller than I had ever seen. Its legs impossibly long, bending in ways that made my stomach twist. Its spine jutted high, its ribs sharp under the wet fur. Its head hung low, almost dragging on the ground, the mouth open wide enough to split the skin at the corners. Its eyes glowed white in the fog. It stepped toward me, the ground beneath it shifted, the earth moving as if something large was crawling just under the surface. Behind it, the fog seemed to open. I saw rows of headstones stretching into darkness, and shapes moving between them, tall, thin shapes, their limbs twisted, their faces hidden. The dog's mouth opened wider. The sound that came out was not one voice, but many. It spoke in tones I could not understand, the air vibrating with the sound. The ground trembled. The shapes in the fog began to move closer. I knew then I was standing in the center of something old, something that had been waiting for a very long time. The dog stepped closer. Its shadow stretched across the ground, longer than its body, reaching for me. The earth cracked beneath my feet. Something moved below the dog's eyes, glowed brighter. It was waiting for me to step forward, into the dark. The ground split beneath my feet. Cold air rose from the cracks, carrying the smell of rot so strong it burned my throat. The dog stepped closer, its legs stretched, its body towering until it loomed above me like a shadow. Its head lifted for the first time, and I saw its face fully. It was not a face, it was a hollow. A black void lined with teeth that seemed to go on forever. The voices poured out, louder now, dozens layered on top of one another, calling words I could not understand but could feel deep inside. My chest, the earth around me shifted. Shapes began to climb from the ground, thin, long-limbed figures pulling themselves from the soil, their heads bent, their arms hanging loose. Their movements were slow, jerking, as if they were not meant to walk in this world. They surrounded me, closing in. The dog stepped closer. Its shadow fell over me. I turned to run, but the ground beneath me gave way. I fell to my knees as the soil crumbled. Cold, damp earth closed around my legs, pulling me down. The figures reached for me. Their hands were long, bony, their touch like ice. The dog lowered its head. Its mouth opened wider. The darkness inside pulling at me, dragging at my chest like a weight. I felt the air leave my lungs. The voices grew louder, filling my head, drowning every thought. The ground swallowed my legs. My hands sank into the cold earth. The dog stepped closer, its face inches from mine. Its eyes glowed so bright, they burned into my vision. The darkness in its mouth spread, wider, deeper, until there was nothing else. The last thing I felt was the cold pulling me under, the voices whispering my name. Then there was nothing. The cemetery was silent again. The gates stood open, and in the fog, just inside, the dog lay quietly on the ground, waiting,